What's going on, everybody? Szerro here. Today I wanted to talk about some of the top decks that you could climb with in the current patch. I have a handful of some pretty decent decks, and we're just going to go over them from top to bottom. First two decks we're going to talk about that I believe are both tier 1. They're both Gangplank decks. This one I believe is the higher of tier 1, so we're going to go over this one first. This is Back Alley Poker. If you guys watched the last video where we talked about the best decks to climb, you would have seen an older version of Back Alley Poker. This is slightly more updated, slightly more refined, and I believe that this deck is one of the strongest decks in the game currently to climb with. It's got tons of solid removal and AoE options between like your Crumbles, your Ruinations, your Vengeances, and then you've got like your Go Hard, right? Your Go Hard, your Keg red cards. You have tons of ways to control the board. You have tons of ways to just aggro and chip down your opponent. You have an incredible amount of card draw. And this deck is just very consistent at cycling through itself and executing its game plan every single game. And for that reason, I believe this is one of the strongest decks in the game that you can currently be climbing with. So I highly recommend this one. Following shortly behind of decks that I think are some of the best decks you could be climbing with in the format right now, I believe Pirate Aggro is one of the strongest decks in the format. For sure. This deck had gotten somewhat recently nerfed with Make It Rain going from 2 cost to 3 cost. Since then, the list hasn't really changed much. I think this is a very stock list. I just changed the 3 copies of the Make It Rain for 2 copies of Croaker and 1 more copy of Farron. And you end up with a very stock, aggressive list. I believe I don't think there are many aggro decks that just do aggro as good as this deck does. I think this is one of the best decks in the game for aggro, for beating people down. It's just got solid stats, it's got a good curve, it's got great reach, and it's got like overwhelm damage that can't be blocked between your Misfortune, between your Grenadier, your Demolitionist, your like Crackshot Courtier triggers. You have so much unblockable damage that I think this deck is just solid at burning people out, closing the game. Excellent deck to climb with. So those are the top decks of the format I think to be climbing with right now. I think shortly after that you have decks like your Jinx Draven, discard aggro, and your Scouts. So I'll go over Jinx Draven. And all the lists I'll put in the comments as well. Not in the comments, in the description. So Jinx Draven is just going to be your stock list, right? We've seen Jinx Draven here before. This list recently we've seen like cards like Battlecaster become more popular in the deck alongside like your Poral Cannons, your House Spiders. You get this really wide board state. You finish off with like a crowd favorite. This deck, it has a lot of sustain between its like rummages, between its Jinx, between its augmented, that it's able to just kind of keep its hand full, and it just pressures its opponents out. It gets so much free stuff between like Jury Rigs and rummage combos, between vision combos, and between your hold on, did I Yeah, this is a pretty solid build. It gets tons of free tempo, tons of free damage, and it burns people out. Lots of ways to refill the hands. Excellent draw if you like playing a very highly aggressive burn deck with a lot of card draw. This is a nice deck for you to climb with. On the more like mid-range Zoo style build, we have Demacia Scouts. Bannerman has been a deck that we've known and loved for a while. This is just your classic Bannerman. You have your 9/1 drops. You got your Ranger's Resolve. You got your Blinding Assaults to go along with your Misfortunes. You got your Laurent Protege to help you control the board a little bit. And this deck is it's just very good at just building up a board, augmenting its stats, and beating people up. It's able to get nice value trades with like Ranger's Resolve or like a Sharp Sight. You can do some pretty dirty things with those cards. And that's kind of what this deck is trying to do. Just curve out, hit its curve, make efficient trades, and eventually it just outstats its opponent and is able to pressure its opponent out of the game. I think Scouts has been a solid deck to climb with for some time now, and it's pretty good. I would recommend this one. A little bit behind it in tier 3. What we have in not tier 3. I guess 1, 2, 3. That's one way. 1.5 or 1.75. So one thing we have here is Trundle Ramp. This deck allegedly got nerfed in the most recent patch, with Weirding Stones going to 3 health rather than 4, and Trundle losing 1 health. But outside of that, this deck really didn't see any nerfs. In a lot of games, honestly, I don't even think the change that they did matters too much. I think I would actually prefer like this. I think Tavern Keeper is really good. I'd prefer the third Tavern Keeper. This version is very greedy, having the 3 copies of Ledros, but it gives you nice top end. Like, you do have ways to close with your Atrocity. You don't always draw your Field of Rush. Really, this deck is just trying to ramp up early, get its mana up as soon as possible, so that I can finish just with a Tryndamere, with a Ledros, or a Field of Rush. And it just tries to just slow the opponent down with removal, such as Withering Wail, with Grasp. And eventually, it stabilizes by just putting such an oppressive win condition on the board that it kills the opponent before they can really, like, threaten them enough. So I think this is a deck that we've all seen quite a bit. Definitely give this one a try if you haven't played it too much in the past. If you're concerned about the nerfs, I don't really think the nerfs matter too much. I think this deck is still really top tier. Outside of that, we have Draven Ezreal aggro, or not aggro, just Draven Ezreal. This isn't an aggro deck at all. This is a control deck, and this deck I think is one of the since we lost Ezreal, since that card got nerfed, we hadn't really seen Ezreal for a while. Recently, Ezreal got buffed, and since that buff, I think Ezreal has once again become a pretty solid win condition. We're trying to figure out the best ways to build it, and it seems like the Noxus Ezreal versions are the most popular. And from what I can tell, out of the most successful builds of the Noxus builds of Ezreal, the Draven ones seem to be the best. Now, this is a list by Alan ZQ. This list is just going to be able to fill its hand with tons of junk between the axes, between Chump Wump mushrooms, and it's going to be able to cycle through itself with its rummages, with its Sawnite Urchins, and with its Sump Dredgers. That's how it keeps its hand. That's how it keeps hand size up. And in the late game, you can like cycle away a House Spider, some like kind of weak things like that. So it's able to keep its hand size up with all these discard effects, and then it just has like solid units that it can pressure with, like Draven, Sump Dredger, Chump Wump. These units all do pressure like decently well. They block decently well as well. And it's got so much removal that doubles as burn damage, like your Mystic Shot, your One Get Excited, your Static Shocks. These double as burn. So you're going to be able to just control the board while burning your opponent out. And eventually, this deck is usually able to outvalue its opponents. Sometimes the one thing about this deck is it does lack healing. So it'll find itself in positions where it gets kind of beaten down and it can't recover from that early beatdown. It gets burnt out before it can actually stabilize and take over the game, because the deck does lack healing. So that is one part where this deck kind of fails. But otherwise, it's a very solid deck. And then after that, in tier 2, we're going to continue down. I think Anivia is like a pretty decent deck that you could be climbing with, actually. My main issue with this deck, as far as a deck to climb with, is this deck is very slow. This deck isn't going to be winning its games very early on at all. Oftentimes, it'll probably be winning by like turn 15, to be completely honest with you. So it's very slow. But where this deck does well is it does excellently against other aggressive decks. Like, if you look at the cards that you have, they line up so well against anything that's trying to play to the board and be aggressive. Like your Vile Feast, your Kindly Tavern Keeper, your Avalanche, your Grasp of the Undying, and your Withering Wails. These cards do it fantastically against those decks. You have 3 copies of Ruination, 3 copies of Vengeance to help you continue to deal well with big threats. Like, this deck is able to just kind of shrug off a lot of the threats that opponents can put at it, or can just send at you. You're able to shrug off a lot of those threats, and you're able to just eventually set up your win condition of multiple Anivias have died. I play a Harrowing, I get back 3 or 4 Anivias, and the opponent's not going to be able to get over those Anivias. The value they provide is just going to be insurmountable, and eventually you win the game. I think this deck is pretty solid. If what you're seeing is a lot of aggressive decks like Scouts, like Pirates, I think this is kind of what you want to play. I think this will do really nicely into those decks. And then finally, the last deck I want to talk about that I think is pretty solid to climb with is Fearsome. Now, when I was figuring this out, I couldn't figure out if I wanted to talk about this version, which is the Targon version, that's more of a Mistwraith build, or more of a Spiders build, like a Noxus aggro Spiders build. I might include both deck codes in the description. We'll figure that out. But this is the one that I decided that I wanted to feature. I think I like the Mistwraiths version a little bit more. I think it does a little bit better into some of the higher position decks in the format, like the back alley poker deck. I think this build does pretty nicely into it. I think you have like so much inevitability, like the harrowing is so much pressure that a lot of decks like kind of struggle to deal with. Being able to be able to answer like 4 or 5 mist rates in one turn can be very difficult, like in one action, honestly, that you only get the one action in between harrowing hit being cast and then them attacking with it, right? So it could be very difficult to answer this card in particular. The one atrocity, like sometimes a mist wraith will hit like 6-7 power, and then all of a sudden this one atrocity is a nuke to the opponent. This deck is able to force through a lot of damage against things like Soraka Kench. Again, they really struggle to block against you. Like I said, back alley poker, they kind of struggle to block against you too. And this deck just kind of does really well at kind of ignoring what the other opponent's game plan is. Just playing a bunch of fearsome units and attacking them down before they can really stabilize is what this deck does really well. And I think this deck is pretty solid to climb with. So give it a shot. And yeah, guys, these are some of the strongest decks I think you could be climbing with right now. There are some other decks I'm sure that you could climb with, like you could play Soraka Kench. I know I didn't include that in the last one either. I don't really, I'm not super crazy about climbing with that deck at the moment. Maybe at some point my mind will change, but right now I don't think it's really the best thing to be climbing with. And there are some other decks that you could climb with, but I think this hits a nice core. Like you have some nice aggro decks. You kind of have a combo deck with the back alley. You have some control with these two. You have a nice spread. So I think this is really solid. I think this is a nice place to look. And if you guys like the video, let me know. Hit that follow button, all that jazz, and I'll see you guys next time.